The Quiet Inn. The village of Oberwies in Bavaria had learned to live with silence. The war had taken its men, and influenza had taken many who remained. By 1923, the silence wasn't peace, it was absence. The kind that settled in corners like dust and clung to the walls like cold. Elise Bauer stood behind the oak counter of the Bauerhaus Inn, polishing a glass more for the sake of movement than cleanliness. She could hear the fire crackling in the lounge, the faint ticking of the brass clock on the mantel, and, beneath it all, the howl of a mountain wind that had wandered too far from home. She glanced at the register. No new names. No footprints in the snow outside. She hadn't had a guest in 5 days. At 24, Elise bore little resemblance to the girl who had once chased sheep up the valley or painted birds with her father on sunlit afternoons. The war had changed everything. It had taken her father in 1916, her mother in 1921, and her brother, well, he had left and never returned. All that remained was this creaking, drafty inn, which had belonged to her grandfather, Matthias Bauer, until he vanished in the final weeks of the war. Most assumed he was dead. Elise wasn't sure. He'd left no letter, no belongings, not even a goodbye. Just silence, like the rest of them. A sudden gust shook the shutters, followed by a thud upstairs. Elise jumped. The second floor had been unoccupied since October, when a merchant from Salzburg stayed one night and fled after insisting. He saw someone standing at the end of the hallway at 3 in the morning. Elise dismissed it then. But tonight, the sound was real. She took the candle from the desk, lit it with a trembling match, and climbed the stairs. The floor groaned under her step. Paint peeled from the banister. She moved past the closed doors rooms 201, 202, and finally 203. The noise had come from here. She reached for the handle. Unlocked. Pushing the door open slowly, she held the candle high. The room was empty, dusty, sheets folded tight, window closed. But near the far wall, beneath the faded rug, the floorboard had shifted just enough to catch her eye. Setting the candle on the bedside table, Elise knelt and pulled the rug back. She ran her fingers along the seam of the warped wood. It moved. Her heart kicked harder. She worked her nails under the edge and lifted. Beneath the plank was a shallow recess, no deeper than a bread box. Inside lay a single item, a yellowed envelope sealed in wax. The wax bore a symbol she recognized: 2 interlocked rings over a 7-point star. It had once been etched onto the brass ring her grandfather wore. Her throat tightened. She sat back on her heels and stared at the envelope as though it might vanish. Then, slowly, she picked it up. It was brittle with age. On the front, in familiar, steady handwriting, Matthias Bauer, November 1918. The date was significant. The armistice had been signed that very month. She had been 17, sitting in her mother's kitchen when the bells rang out, not knowing her grandfather was already gone. Why had he hidden this? She broke the seal carefully. The paper inside was thinner, written in a darker ink that had begun to fade. The letter read, "To Matthias Bauer, if you're reading this, it means I've failed. The artifact must not fall into government hands. Bury it in the place we first spoke of, the one hidden by frost and fire. If I do not return by winter's end, destroy the map. K." Elise stared at the page. The artifact? Frost and fire? It sounded like code. A spy novel. And K, no first name. No explanation. Just an initial, curling elegantly at the bottom like a signature on a secret. The name stirred something in her memory, but not enough to place. She reached again into the hollow. Nothing else, no map, no key. Just the letter. She sat back on the dusty wooden floor and listened. Not to the storm, not to the fire, but to the silence her grandfather had left behind. This wasn't some drunken letter tucked away by accident. This was hidden deliberately, sealed in wax, with instructions and warnings. Elise glanced at the window. Snow danced across the glass in swirling ribbons. The mountains loomed just beyond, black silhouettes in a white world. Frost and fire. The phrase stuck. There were glacier caves near Berchtesgaden. She remembered her father mentioning them. Inside, frozen tunnels glowed blue, and thermal springs bubbled beneath the surface. Cold and heat together. Frost and fire. She stood abruptly. Something inside her had shifted. Not curiosity, something deeper. The need to understand. To know why her grandfather had disappeared without a word. To follow the trail, he left. She returned downstairs, still gripping the letter. The candle flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the empty lounge. From a small drawer behind the counter, she retrieved a satchel and her father's revolver. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She didn't believe in ghosts, but this felt like a summons from one. Tomorrow, she would take the early train to Berchtesgaden. Maybe the caves would hold answers. Maybe not. But she had spent 5 years surviving in silence. Now, finally, she had a reason to break it. Elise didn't sleep. She packed while the fire hissed and popped behind her. The letter folded neatly in her coat pocket like a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. Her bag was modest 2 wool dresses, a scarf, her father's revolver wrapped in linen, the worn leather journal she carried everywhere but never wrote in. By dawn, Oberwies was covered in a new layer of snow, clean and deceptive, like a fresh sheet over a tired bed. The inn, once bustling in the winters, now looked like a relic from another era. She paused on the threshold, key in hand, and turned to face it. The Bauer House Inn. Her inheritance. Her cage. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something larger. She locked the door, placed the key under the flower pot like her mother used to, and walked to the station at the edge of town. No one saw her off. No one asked where she was going. The train arrived late, groaning like it resented the effort. The conductor barely glanced at her ticket. Elise took a window seat and pressed her fingers to the cold glass as the village receded, dissolving into mist and snow. Berchtesgaden emerged 3 hours later from the folds of the mountains like a secret. Nestled between sharp peaks, its spires rose against the sky with a quiet defiance. Elise stepped off the train and felt the difference immediately. This was not her village. This was a place with eyes. Watchful. Expectant. She pulled her coat tighter and joined the slow stream of travelers heading toward the central square. Stalls lined the walkways, selling smoked meats and steaming chestnuts. Children laughed and threw snow. Men in hats leaned in close to share news. The world had not stopped here. But she wasn't here for markets or joy. She was here for the frost. And the fire. She found a small pension on the edge of town run by a widow named Anneliese, who accepted her coins without questions. Elise asked about the glacier caves. Too dangerous this time of year, the woman said, handing her a metal key. You'll get yourself buried if you go alone. I won't, Elise lied. She spent the rest of the day gathering supplies. Matches, a rope, a coil of wire, and a flashlight with fresh batteries. Her father used to say that the smallest things saved your life. She believed him now more than ever. Back at the pension, she studied the letter again. The handwriting was clean, urgent, masculine. The place we first spoke of, that line tugged at her memory. Her grandfather had spent time in Berchtesgaden before the war, attending meetings about alpine preservation. That was the story, at least. But she'd always sensed something else. There had been one summer she was 9 when he'd returned from a trip with a new walking stick and a strange, gleaming scar along his left forearm. He never spoke of it. When she asked, he changed the subject. That summer, he took her into the woods just beyond Oberwies. They followed a trail he said was older than even God. He told her stories about ancient routes, secret rivers, and the way mountains kept secrets better than people did. Places remember, he had said. You just have to know how to ask. Now, Elise wondered if that had been a metaphor, or a warning. The next morning, she dressed before dawn and left the pension with her pack slung tight across her shoulder. She hired a sleigh cart from a quiet man with missing teeth who took her to the glacier trail. He asked no questions, just pointed once at the thickening clouds. Storm tonight, he said. Won't be a kind one. I'll be back before dark, she said. Another lie. The trail narrowed as she climbed. Snow muffled the world. Trees hunched under heavy white cloaks. The cold was biting, but not cruel, not yet. She followed the narrow ridgeline where the wind cut harder, and the footprints behind her faded faster than she could make new ones. Eventually, the trail ended at a broken gate and a rusting sign. Holeingang verboten, cave entrance forbidden. Elise stepped over it without pause. The entrance yawned open like a forgotten mouth, jagged and dark, ringed with frost. She turned on the flashlight and stepped inside. Instant cold swallowed her. The silence was immediate and perfect, as though she'd dropped into another world. Ice crystals glittered on the stone walls. Stalactites hung like teeth above her. Water dripped from some distant place, the slow pulse of time. She moved carefully, pressing one hand to the cave wall for balance. The flashlight beam slid over rock and shadow, revealing nothing until it did. She stopped. There, carved into the ice, was a symbol. 2 interlocking rings over a 7-point star. The same symbol from the wax seal. Her breath fogged in front of her. She reached out and touched the carving. The ice was smoother here, like someone had melted and reshaped it. The rings were etched deep, deliberate. She looked around. Behind the carving, the rock jutted in a narrow crevice. She angled her flashlight, revealing a space barely wide enough to crawl through. Elise exhaled and crouched. Her knees hit ice. The rock scraped her shoulders. But she pressed forward, heart pounding. On the other side, the tunnel opened into a small chamber maybe 10 feet across. And there, tucked into a hollow in the wall, wrapped in what looked like oilskin, was a box. She reached for it. It was heavy, cold, metal. The latch was rusted but gave way with a grunt. Inside was a journal, the leather cracked and dark. No artifact, no weapon, just a book. She opened the first page. If you're reading this, then the plan has failed. We tried to hold the line, but Berlin has eyes everywhere. What we smuggled out of Vienna must be protected, even if the truth is buried with us. It was signed at the bottom, Matthias Bauer. Elise's hands trembled. So, he hadn't vanished without reason. He had been hiding something important, something dangerous. And he wasn't alone. She heard it then, a scuff of stone behind her. She spun, flashlight darting. Nothing. But she wasn't alone anymore. The sound echoed again. Not loud, not clumsy, just wrong. A single scrape in the quiet, like leather sliding over stone. Elise held her breath and dimmed the flashlight, letting darkness swallow the chamber once more. Her heart thudded loud enough to betray her. She pressed her back against the frozen wall, the journal clutched to her chest. Her mind raced. Had she left tracks in the snow? Had someone followed her up the mountain? Or worse, had someone been waiting? The silence returned, thick as ice. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. It was hard to tell in the dark. She waited until her breath slowed, until the instinct to flee stopped screaming. Then she edged toward the narrow passage she'd crawled through earlier, flashlight off, hand trailing the cave wall for guidance. Halfway through the crevice, her foot hit something soft. A boot. She froze. Then a voice, low and British, murmured just ahead. "You're a difficult woman to keep up with." Elise swung the flashlight on and raised it like a weapon. The light hit a familiar face dusted with frost, lined with exhaustion, but unmistakable. Leo Sommers. The man from the train. He squinted against the beam. "Mind not blinding me. What the hell are you doing here?" Elise asked, not lowering the light. "I could ask you the same. Except I'm not holding a weapon. Give me a reason why I shouldn't assume you followed me from Oberwies." "Because I did," he said simply. "And because you're not the only one who read the name Bauer and knew it meant something." She stared at him, unwilling to lower the flashlight but equally unwilling to pretend her heart wasn't pounding for entirely new reasons. Leo shifted slightly, hands raised. "Look, you drop a sealed envelope with an odd wax crest while reaching for your train ticket, and someone like me notices. I didn't drop anything. You didn't mean to." He held up a small notebook, hers. The leather journal she kept for years, now in his hand. She swore and lunged forward, grabbing it. He let go easily. "I wasn't spying, Elise. I was curious. At first. Then worried. You're not exactly subtle." "Neither are you," she snapped. Leo sighed and leaned against the icy wall. Listen, I used to work in cryptography during the war. Mostly harmless code-breaking troop movements, radio chatter. But before that, I translated symbols and ciphers for a group out of Cambridge. We tracked folklore, myths, old family crests. That seal on your letter? I've seen it before, connected to something much bigger than one missing innkeeper. Elise narrowed her eyes. What do you want? Answers, he said. Same as you. That gave her pause. She lowered the light just enough to see his eyes. They weren't smug. They were tired. Like someone who'd seen too many truths he didn't ask for. After a long silence, she gestured with her chin. Come on then. If you're already here, you might as well read. Back in the small chamber, she opened the journal again. Leo crouched beside her, pulling a lighter from his coat and flicking it open. The warm glow danced over the pages. The writing was dense, lined with codes, initials, half-legible sketches. Elise turned to the second entry. Kay and I delivered the final shipment to Salzburg. The scientist, VD, was escorted safely to Zurich. But the artifact remains too dangerous, too visible. Kay thinks hiding it in plain sight is safest. I disagree. Leo read silently, then looked up. VD could be Victor Drossler, physicist. Jewish. Vanished during the final months of the war. Elise nodded slowly. My grandfather knew him. If this is real, he knew a lot of people. She turned another page. More code names. More warnings. Then a line circled in pencil. Berlin suspects. Eyes in the post. Kay says disappear if needed. I'll leave the letter in the floor, just in case. Elise exhaled slowly. Her grandfather had prepared for this. For her. Maybe. For someone to pick up where he left off. Leo tapped the edge of the page. If this gets out, if the people named in here are still alive or connected, it'll cause chaos. Maybe that's the point. Elise looked at him. You think we should burn it? I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. Leo rubbed his jaw. I'm thinking that secrets are powerful, and power gets people killed. Your grandfather knew that. She stared at the journal, at the jagged handwriting, the quiet desperation in every line, and he tried to do the right thing. That's what worries me. They sat in silence. The cave seemed to listen. Then Leo said, You know, there's a name in here I recognize. Kay, I've heard that initial before. Once. Late 1917. A file passed through British channels about a double agent operating in Bavaria. No full name. Just Kay. Elise turned sharply. You think my grandfather worked with a spy? Leo shrugged. Not a spy. A resistor. Someone smuggling information. People. Art. Even tech. They called him the Keeper. Kay, that's why I came after you. Elise closed the journal carefully. Outside, wind howled louder through the tunnel. We need to get down the mountain, she said. Storm's coming. I know the route. Leo nodded. And the journal. She placed it inside her satchel and buckled it shut. We keep it. For now. They exited the cave slowly, light leading the way. By the time they reached the trail, the sky had turned to ash. Snow began to fall again, heavier this time, biting and insistent. As they trudged down the narrow ridge, Elise looked back once at the cave, at the mountain, at the secret she'd pulled from ice and silence. She had a choice now, to chase the truth or bury it again. She didn't look back a second time. The storm chased them down the mountain. By the time Elise and Leo reached the tree line, snow clung to their coats in thick layers, and their boots had gone numb from the cold. Elise's fingers trembled around the journal in her satchel, not just from frostbite, but from everything they'd uncovered. They took shelter in an abandoned hunting shack, more a wooden box than a building, with half a roof and a rusted iron stove that coughed smoke only when Leo kicked it awake. Elise sat cross-legged on a crate, drying her gloves over a pan of melted snow, while Leo peeled off his outer coat and stoked the fire. Outside, the wind howled and rattled the walls. So, Elise said, breaking the silence, You're following me, reading my things, quoting war files. You want to explain who you really are now. Leo looked up, a smirk tugging at one side of his mouth. I was a codebreaker, like I said, British Army, then a civilian analyst, and occasionally, a courier of information the Crown didn't want traced. We were all just paper pushers until 1917. Then Berlin started playing a deeper game. She raised an eyebrow. And what game would that be? Culture, he said. Not bombs, not tanks, but art, people, knowledge. They were looting it all. Not just for wealth, for control. Your grandfather, whether he meant to or not, got caught in the middle of it. Elise absorbed that in silence. The journal sat beside her like a weight. You're saying this is more than history. It's stolen identity. It's memory, Leo said. And memory is dangerous when regimes are changing. He handed her a piece of hard bread. She chewed it slowly, watching him through the flickering light. You seem very invested in my family's mess, she said finally. He hesitated, because someone once helped me escape my own. The words were simple, but the tone told her not to ask. She didn't. The next morning, the storm passed, leaving the forest quiet and blanketed in blinding white. They hiked to the road, flagged down a passing lorry, and returned to Berchtesgaden by mid-morning, soaked, exhausted, and invisible among tourists and villagers going about their day. Back at the pension, Anneliese raised an eyebrow at Elise's frostbitten cheeks and muddy boots but said nothing. Elise changed into dry clothes, hid the journal in a false bottom of her satchel, and met Leo in the parlor, where a gramophone hissed out an old waltz. They sat by the window, pretending to sip tea while watching a black Opel idle across the street. The same car had been parked there since dawn. You see it too, Leo murmured. She nodded. They've been watching since we arrived. Last night, someone checked with Anneliese about her guests. She lied for us. Leo sipped his tea thoughtfully. That was quick. Either you're being followed for the journal, or I am. Or both. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded newspaper. On the front page, Rogue Scholar linked to pre-war archive theft still missing. A grainy photograph showed a man Elise didn't recognize. Leo tapped the corner. This man was Victor Drossler, the physicist your grandfather mentions. He vanished in 1918 after helping smuggle records out of Vienna. Elise, he paused, then leaned in. This isn't just about documents. The artifact, it might have been something Drossler built, not just something they stole. A chill crept up her spine. You think my grandfather was hiding a machine? She asked. I think he hid the idea of one, and the names of the people who could build it. Elise looked toward the street. The Opel was gone now, but she felt no safer. Then we need to go, she said. Somewhere they won't find us. Agreed. They took the night train. The cabin was small, the windows fogged, the scent of coal and iron thick in the air. Elise sat with the journal in her lap, flipping pages by candlelight while Leo traced possible escape routes on a folded map. Neither spoke for a long time. At one point, she caught him watching her, his expression unreadable. What? She asked. You've changed since Oberweis. I've had practice losing people, she said flatly. Leo didn't flinch. That's not what I meant. She closed the journal. I don't need to be understood. I need to be 2 steps ahead of whoever's hunting us. That's fair, he said quietly. But people like us, we get so used to surviving, we forget what it's like to live. She looked out the window. The mountains passed like shadows. Maybe survival is living. These days. Neither spoke again for some time. At a junction just outside Salzburg, the train stopped for routine inspection. 2 soldiers boarded. Elise's grip on the journal tightened. The door to their compartment opened. A tall man in a wool coat entered, flanked by a younger officer. The older man's eyes swept the room, then landed on Elise. Papers, he said in sharp German. Leo handed theirs over first, calm and smooth. Elise followed, heart pounding. The officer glanced through them quickly, but not carelessly. Then he studied Elise. Bauer, he said, reading her last name aloud. She gave a polite nod. Common in the region. Yes, he said slowly. Too common. Then a beat too long. But finally, he handed the papers back. Safe travels. They left without another word. As the door slid shut, Leo exhaled. Elise's hands didn't stop shaking until Salzburg was 2 stops behind them. They arrived in Munich before dawn. A thick fog rolled through the train yard, swallowing sound and softening the world. Elise felt like she was entering another chapter, not of a journey, but of her life. They walked quickly through the city's northern district until they reached an old bookstore. Leo remembered one that had once doubled as a courier post for underground messages. Inside, it smelled of damp paper and ink. The shelves leaned with age. A small brass bell jingled as they entered. From the back, an elderly man appeared, round glasses, snow-white beard, and an immediate look of suspicion. Leo removed his hat. We're looking for a book on old Bavarian symbology. Specifically, one marked with 2 rings and a star. The man said nothing. Then he nodded once and turned toward the back room. Elise followed, the journal hidden in her coat, its contents growing heavier by the hour. The back room of the bookstore was dim, lit only by a single green-shaded lamp and dust-mottled sunlight that filtered through a frosted window. It smelled like dry paper, old ink, and time. The bookseller moved like someone who had learned to make no sound unless necessary. He walked to a filing cabinet tucked behind a curtain and removed a thin volume bound in cracked blue leather. He handed it to Leo wordlessly. Leo turned to Elise. This is it. The cover bore no title, just the same symbol etched into the cave wall, 2 interlocking rings atop a 7-point star. Elise felt it again, the now familiar chill that came not from cold but from history rising through the cracks. The bookseller finally spoke, his voice rough with age and accent. You're lucky you asked me, not the man who owns this place now. He wouldn't recognize the symbol, but he'd sell it to someone who did. Do you know what it means? Elise asked. He shook his head. Not fully, but I know it's older than the war. Older than Bavaria, even. It shows up in the margins of old monastic records, and in the correspondence of people who disappeared without graves. He turned his eyes to Leo. You're walking too close to something that was buried for a reason. Leo gave a tired smile. That's the only way I know how to walk. The man grunted. Then walk carefully. They took the book and the journal to a nearby cafe, a quiet place with lace curtains and wood-paneled walls. It was just afternoon, and only one other patron sat inside, reading a newspaper with unconvincing interest. Elise kept her back to the wall and the journal open in front of her, one hand resting on her revolver beneath the table. Leo flipped through the blue volume. This isn't a narrative, he said. It's a cipher key. He turned the book so she could see. On each page was a different arrangement of symbols, circles, stars, triangles, lines intersecting like clock hands, followed by numbered columns and foreign scripts. Whoever wrote your grandfather's journal, Leo continued, used this as the encoding structure. That's why the entries seem fragmented. They weren't written to be read by just anyone. They were led. Elise frowned. So how do we unlock it? Leo smiled faintly. We don't. You do. She looked at him sharply. Me? Your grandfather didn't trust strangers. But he did leave this for someone. My guess? He layered the codes in a way only someone from the family could recognize. He slid the cipher book closer. Look at this. He pointed to a section where the numbers 1 to 7 were repeated beneath 7-point stars. These align with dates, possibly birthdays or anniversaries. Anything stand out to you? Elise's eyes scanned the sequence. Nothing. Then the 17th of June, she murmured. Why? That was the day my father proposed to my mother. He always left her flowers on that day. Leo turned a page in the journal and pointed to an entry marked with a triangle and the number 17. Elise translated aloud. Today we met at the bridge again. The boy with the glasses was missing. Kay says he won't be back. I think we both know why. She went still. I remember a story, she whispered. My mother told me, once during the war, a boy from the village who wore thick glasses stopped coming to church. No one ever said where he went. I thought it was nonsense. Leo's voice dropped. It wasn't. Elise flipped further. Now the symbols made more sense. Hidden behind seemingly bland notations were names, places, conversations that read like code until they were real. One entry chilled her. The archive in Vienna is too well guarded. Kay believes if we can distract the courier in Salzburg, we might gain access. Drosler's prototype is still hidden in the vault beneath the old opera house. But if I am discovered, they will erase me. Drosler, Leo said, voice sharp. So, it's not just theory. He did build something. Elise stared at the page. And it's in Salzburg. Leo nodded. Which means that's where we go next. But as Elise turned the page, her hand froze. Between two entries, a smaller page had been inserted thinner paper, yellowed and delicate. On it was a simple hand-drawn map. At the center, Salzburg, with red ink marking a building labeled Storytime, the State Opera House. And beside it, a single symbol, 2 rings and a star, drawn in dark pencil. The vault. Leo looked at her. That's the artifact's final location. Elise's thoughts moved faster than her breath. We don't even know what it is. We know Drosler built it. We know the military wanted it. We know your grandfather died protecting it. That's enough. She looked at him. No, she said. That's not enough to risk getting ourselves killed. Leo leaned forward, eyes steady. Elise, you don't get it. Whatever this is, it might be unfinished. Or it might be sitting in the wrong hands already. If we can find it first, even just to destroy it, we have a chance to stop something worse. The tension hung between them, thick and undeniable. Elise closed the journal. Then, without a word, she stood. Leo rose too. Where are you going? She threw on her coat. To buy train tickets. That night, they boarded the last train to Salzburg. It rattled over frozen tracks under a black sky, and Elise sat awake, one hand on her satchel, the other resting near Leo's, though she didn't say a word. Outside the window, the dark shapes of the Alps loomed like sleeping giants. She thought of her grandfather, of the people he saved, of the thing he couldn't. And as the train wound its way toward the city of music and shadows, Elise knew she was no longer just following a trail. She was entering the heart of the storm. Salzburg greeted them with bitter wind and a city square lit like a stage set, golden lights spilling from balconies and lanterns into crisp, early evening shadows. Music drifted faintly from a quartet rehearsing behind closed opera house doors, violins rising above the sound of footsteps and wheels on cobblestone. Elise tightened her scarf, eyes flicking to every alley, every face. She couldn't help it now. Suspicion had become reflex. Leo walked beside her, one hand buried in his coat pocket, where she suspected he kept something sharp. He moved with the ease of a man who'd been watched before and had stopped caring who did the watching. Their hotel was tucked above a bakery just off Gas. Modest, warm, and run by an old woman who didn't ask for passports, only cash. That, Leo had said, was the safest kind of host. In the room, Elise unwrapped the journal again, spreading the hand-drawn map on the bed between them. The Storytime was marked clearly in red. But it wasn't the main building they were after, it was something below it. There's no public record of a vault under the opera house, Leo murmured, examining the lines. But this, he tapped a faded symbol near the lower left corner. This suggests access from the Western Service Tunnel. He pointed to a side street just off Gas, a narrow road that Elise recalled passed between the opera and a disused chapel. She looked up at him. You think it's still there? I think, he said, if it was destroyed, they'd have erased the paper trail too. But the map exists. And someone left it hidden for a reason. Elise stared at the symbol again, 2 rings over a 7-point star. Whatever her grandfather had tried to protect, it lay behind that mark. The next morning, under cover of daylight and anonymity, they made their way to the Storytime. The building was grand and imposing, its classical facade staring out over the city like a queen in mourning, all archways and ornate windows, cream-colored stone catching winter light. They didn't go in. Instead, they walked around it slowly, pretending to be tourists. Elise held her camera, an old, battered thing, and snapped photos as Leo gestured at nothing in particular. To a stranger, they were just another couple passing time. But their focus was sharp. Leo stopped near the chapel. A wrought iron gate, half concealed by ivy and frost, was set into the stone wall. Behind it, a stairwell descended into shadow. A faded sign read, Zutritt verboten, technischer Bereich. No entry, technical access. Elise moved closer. The padlock was rusted, and the ground around it? Disturbed. Someone had come here recently. Leo bent, brushing snow aside. And there it was, carved into the stone threshold, nearly lost to erosion, but still visible. 2 rings. A 7-point star. Elise felt her breath catch. This is it, she whispered. Leo stood, eyes scanning the street. We'll need to come back after dark. Bring tools. She nodded. And Elise, he lowered his voice. We're not the only ones who found it. That lock's been touched recently. Could be locals. Could be someone worse. Elise's fingers twitched toward her coat where the revolver rested. Then we move first. That night, with the city asleep and snow falling soft as ash, they returned to the gate. Leo knelt and picked the lock with quiet efficiency, the tumblers clicking open like old secrets. The gate creaked as they pushed it inward, then snapped shut behind them. The stone stairwell smelled of dust, mildew, and ancient damp. Elise lit her flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark. The passage narrowed. Pipes ran overhead, old and rusted. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped rhythmically. The silence was so deep, Elise could hear her own heartbeat. Then a door. Metal. Unmarked. Leo tried the handle. Locked. Step back, Elise said. She drew the revolver and aimed low. A single shot echoed like a cannon, ricocheting off stone. The lock shattered. Smoke coiled into the air. They pushed the door open together. Beyond was a small chamber maybe 10 meters wide. The walls were tiled in old white porcelain, cracked and stained with age. Shelves lined one side, bare but for a few glass bottles and rusted tools. But it was what sat at the center that held their attention. A stone pedestal, waist-high, carved into its surface, 2 rings and the star. And atop it, a metal box. It was rectangular, reinforced, and unlike anything Elise had seen before. Not quite military, not quite industrial. It hummed faintly. Leo stepped forward, slowly. There's no lock, he murmured. Just seals. He brushed his fingers over the top. The hum grew louder, or perhaps it only felt that way. Elise looked around. This wasn't just storage. This was a vault, a controlled environment. Leo nodded. And whatever's inside, it's still active. He glanced at her. Your grandfather protected this. Whatever it is. We open it, we change everything. Elise swallowed. Then let's change it. Leo pressed the release. The box opened with a hiss. Inside was a cylinder, no longer than a loaf of bread, wrapped in brass and etched with symbols. Tiny wires coiled at one end. A glass panel ran down its center, within which a faint blue light pulsed. It looked more like art than weapon, but both could kill. Leo stared, speechless. Elise whispered, "What is it?" He finally answered, "It's a power cell. Experimental. I've only heard of prototypes. Portable energy, enough to run a city block. Or a machine." Elise stepped back. Drosler's invention. Leo nodded slowly. If it's real, this could change the world. Industry, communication, weapons, everything. And that's why they buried it. He met her eyes. We can't keep it. Elise stared at the glowing cylinder. Then she looked at the journal and thought of her grandfather. And she realized it wasn't about owning it. It was about protecting it from everyone. A footstep echoed behind them. Then another. Leo spun, drawing a small pistol. Elise turned her flashlight toward the door. Two shadows stood in the threshold. One stepped forward. A man, tall, in a gray overcoat. His eyes caught the flashlight and glinted cold. "Elise Bauer," he said calmly, in perfect German. "You found it. Excellent." The stranger stepped fully into the room, his overcoat sweeping the floor behind him like a cloak. Behind him, the second figure remained in shadow, but Elise could feel their presence silent, watchful, dangerous. Leo raised his pistol. "Steady. That's close enough." The man stopped, unbothered. "You don't know what you're holding," he said. "And you certainly don't know who you're threatening." "Try me," Leo said coolly. The man's eyes flicked to Elise. "You're the granddaughter, aren't you? Matthias Bauer's blood." He smiled faintly. He was clever, but he died thinking he could outrun men like me. Elise took a step forward, placing herself between the cylinder and the intruders. "Who are you?" The man tipped his head. "A collector of lost things, and dangerous ones." His gaze dropped to the humming power cell. "You have something that was never yours to find." "It was my grandfather's," Elise said. "He died protecting it. And yet here it is, in your hands." He took another step forward. Leo's pistol clicked. "Move again and you'll find out if I bluff." Still, the man didn't flinch. "You don't understand what you're carrying," he said. "It's not just a power cell. It's a prototype key. The kind that unlocks a machine that Drossler never finished because he vanished before he could test it." He nodded toward the cylinder. "That device can stabilize energy on a scale no one's ever controlled. Your grandfather knew that. So did the man he worked with, the one known only as K." Elise's breath caught. "You knew him." "I was him." The silence was absolute. Leo lowered his weapon just a fraction. "You're lying." The man's smile widened. "Matthias and I worked together from 1917 to 1919. We smuggled scientists, stole secrets, buried dangerous knowledge. Then he broke rank. He wanted to destroy it all." Elise shook her head. "That doesn't sound like him." "You think you knew him?" the man said, voice rising slightly. "He lied to everyone, including you." He stepped closer now, not bothering to ask permission. "Your grandfather believed the world wasn't ready for this power, that no one should wield it. But he was wrong. The world was already changing. And without this," he gestured to the glowing cylinder, "we lose." Leo stepped in. "Lose to whom?" The man's face hardened. "To the next war. The next empire. Don't be naive. You think peace is real? Peace is just a breath between wars. And this power is the edge." He reached out a gloved hand. "Give it to me. I'll finish what your grandfather was too afraid to do." Elise stared at him. And in her mind, she saw her grandfather's face, not the man in photographs, but the one from memory. His quiet eyes. The way he'd said places remember. The way he'd vanished to protect something bigger than himself. "No," she said softly. "You don't get to finish his story." She turned to Leo. "Get it ready." Leo understood immediately. He backed toward the pedestal and reached for the cylinder. The second shadow moved then fast. A gunshot cracked through the chamber. Leo staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Elise drew her revolver and fired without hesitation. Her shot struck the wall, a warning enough to make the second figure pause. The first man's expression twisted. "You shouldn't have done that." "Neither should you," Elise said, stepping between Leo and the pedestal. The cylinder still pulsed, still glowed. She glanced down. A panel at its base, a release latch, half open. "Destroy the map," her grandfather's letter had said. "If I do not return, destroy it all." Her fingers trembled as they reached for the latch. "You don't want to do that," the man said, his voice suddenly quiet, coaxing. "That power could feed cities, end famine, rebuild Europe. You'd throw it all away." Elise's eyes were wet now, not from fear but certainty. "No," she whispered. "I'm saving it." Then she pulled the latch. The cylinder began to whine high, shrill, building fast. Leo's eyes widened. Run! They didn't wait. Elise grabbed the journal and Leo's good arm, and together they fled the chamber as the sound behind them reached a fever pitch. Stone trembled. Pipes cracked. Light bloomed behind them, blue, then white, then nothing. They burst into the alley behind the chapel as an explosion rocked the ground, muffled by layers of stone and earth. Smoke rose from a hidden vent behind the wall. Birds scattered into the sky. The vault was gone. The device gone. So was Kay. Later, in a quiet room above a bakery, Leo's arm was bandaged with linen and whiskey, and Elise sat across from him, the journal in her lap. "What now?" he asked, wincing. She didn't answer at first. She turned the last page of the journal. There, written in her grandfather's hand smaller, almost like a note to himself, was one final line. "If she finds this, she will know what to do. Not because I taught her, but because she has always known how to choose. MB." Elise smiled faintly. "I think," she said, "we find the others." Leo blinked. "Others?" She nodded. This wasn't the only piece. Drosler's machine was never finished. But the idea, the science, it's still out there. And someone has to make sure it stays hidden. Leo leaned back. "You're becoming your grandfather." "No," she said softly. "I'm becoming me." Outside, Salzburg lit up as bells rang the hour. And in a small room filled with secrets, Elise Bauer became something her enemies never expected. The Keeper of Memory. Don't miss the next twist. Subscribe before the past catches up.